It's so full of pieces that it makes us get confused about that too.
First of all, good evening. Look, regarding the issue, we've already talked a few times about having a squad with solutions, so I even contradict your statement a little. We went with our strongest team. Our strongest team is to wear the shirt, go in with 11 players, show quality and availability to achieve the club's objectives. And today that was achieved with the 4-1 result. And I think deservedly so. And once again, you know that we have a game today, Sunday, odd. In 2 days we have another game, odd. Then on Wednesday we have another game. And it's almost impossible for the same player to play 3 games. And if we're talking about 90 minutes, then it's much more difficult. Therefore, it's not just talk, the coach also has to make the players believe that when they play, they are capable of performing their functions. And that's what Willian has demonstrated so far. Well, we've had some different lineups, haven't we? And the response on the field has been positive, and even for those who some would like to always be starters, but for me, the starters are those who come on from the beginning, and today the starters were that base 11, and the others came on later to help. Jardim, good evening. Mauricio Luis from Lance here. I wanted to ask you a little about the importance of some very established players in this Flamengo squad who were fundamental to the victory today. Carrascal, Bruno Henrique, Pedro, who also scored in the second half, at the very end, and even Paqueta, who arrived recently, but is also very identified with the fans. So these players that the fans embrace, the fans adore, the fans chant their names, and you also arrived not so long ago, I wanted to know how you see their importance in the locker room, within the club, and obviously also on the field. Thank you. Of course. Certainly, all these players have a history within the club, especially Bruno Arrascaeta. And Pedro, as you said, Paquet only arrived this year. But he's been here before too. They are players extremely identified with the club's values, with the knowledge of the weight of the shirt, the knowledge that, regardless of the opponent, we already have a responsibility. And that's the message I also use with these more experienced players, so that on the field we can show everyone that regardless of who is playing from the start, we have to have that responsibility to wear this Flamengo shirt and impose our style of football, impose our ideas. I think we started the game very well. Unfortunately, a mistake losing the ball in a dangerous area. We ended up conceding the equalizer, but then we reacted. In my analysis of the statistics, I think the opponent had 1 shot on goal. It therefore clearly shows just how superior we were in relation to the game. A good victory, as we like. 6 points, and now we need to get this team back in shape, so that on Sunday we have another game against Bia's team, too, which is a good team, and fortunately or not, this year they are only playing in one competition, the Cup, but they have a week of rest to face us, and will be fresh. Because of this, we also need to be fully refreshed in order to be competitive and to set our sights on another win. Jardim, good evening. Igor Sequeira from Wall. You mentioned the loss of possession in the dangerous area. I was going to ask you about Carrascal, right? How was it for you to see that play right at the beginning, that missed goal that caught our attention? He was also involved in that loss of possession that led to the second goal, the equalizing goal. Sorry. How are you dealing with Carrascal, who has been sent off, received a suspension from the STJD, and will be judged again tomorrow? So you're analyzing his current form and that specific missed goal. Did you manage to understand more or less what happened in that dynamic? Carrascal, compared to those we've talked about before, is younger, isn't he? He's a young player, a very talented one indeed. But it's undeniable that he's not at his best right now. This is due to several factors, including recent expulsions and a general lack of form, but it certainly doesn't diminish his inherent quality. And my job as a coach is to support him and continue to encourage him so that he can express all his talent, correcting him when necessary, but encouraging him, because that's how football is. Some players have better moments, others dip, and others shine. It's a collective effort, and it usually works like that, mothered, but in terms of work and dedication, bothered, I can't complain that he's been giving his all. Only a few things aren't going well, but I believe my experience tells me that these types of players will get through this moment and then things will go well, because they have been working exhaustively and professionally. Good evening, Jardim David Ferreira from Jornal Globo here. Congratulations on the victory. Police, I wanted to ask you something you've already talked about. That moment when Independiente Mendes equalized and Flamengo managed to score the second goal in the first half, right? So see the reaction Flamengo had there are not losing control of the match and managing to regain the lead before halftime. From the beginning of the game, Flamengo showed a high rotation, intensity on the field, and mental strength, right? So I wanted to ask you how that preparation was, the mental part, right? For the team to maintain control there. And finally, managed to recover the course of the game. Thank you. Well, the preparation for this game was based on the importance of two things: the importance of the game and the result. And I told the players that a positive result would give us a 5 or 6 point advantage over the other two opponents, right? Right now we're first with points, then third has 1, 3, and fourth has 0. We're opening up a gap here in relation to the last two. An outcome other than positive might have resulted in our being relegated to third place, and that wasn't our objective. Regarding behavior, the essential aspect is the respect we must show all our opponents. And I also talked about the second round of last year in the same competition. I talked about 2 of the clubs that played yesterday and also couldn't beat the South American teams. And I talked about all this so that the concentration, holben, the motivation, holben, and the attitude would be strong. And that's what happened in the game. We started strong. We tried to impose our game. We pressured the opponent, but we didn't manage to score another goal in those first 15 or 20 minutes. We had several chances to do so. Well, anyway, the 90 minutes ended because it was a well-won game, especially with the best moments being the first 20 minutes until the equalizing goal, maybe 20 or 25, and then the second half caused us, which I also think was a balanced second half. Jardim, Raiz Simplicio here. Good evening. Jardim, last year Flamengo made it very clear what the priorities were in terms of competitions, right? Next week, Gokin. Copa do Brasil starts, Gogian, so there are 3 competitions simultaneously that Flamengo will be playing in. And last year the board, everyone, Erdu, made it very clear that the priority was the Brazilian Championship. Throughout the season, the Libertadores also fit into the priorities. And I wanted to know from you, Veas, if you've already talked, Veas, if there are priorities this year, Veas, how is that going internally? Certainly, when I arrived here, 4 days before the Carioca final, the priority was to win the Carioca Championship. To be 3-time champions, so we could win 4 times next year. Right? That was the priority. Right now we have 3 competitions, and for those who play for Flamengo, all competitions are a priority. It's a priority right now, in these 2 months we have, to qualify the team for the second phase of the Libertadores. It's a priority for us to have a good performance in the championship and be close to first place. And it's a priority for us to get through the Copa do Brasil. That's what's prioritized. 1 of 2 situations might not happen, but it's our priority because, as I told you, we work at Flamengo, we have a squad that can have some players changed and maintain intensity, and that's why all conditions are a priority for us. Jardim Vior Nicolau from Flamengo TV, congratulations on the route. I wanted to talk a little about Paquetá. Paquetá has been performing impressively in the last 3 games, playing as a defensive midfielder, so a second striker, and he's an extremely versatile player. He's played well as an attacking midfielder and as a wide midfielder. I wanted to ask you what the challenge is in having a player with that level of versatility and finding a place for him in the team, right? Does injury end up choosing his position, or do you plan to give him a run in a specific position? How do you see his current situation? Well, football is a game where it's usually important to have some versatile players in squads. We have Paquetá in midfield, who is a versatile player. We have Bruno, who also plays on the wings, plays centrally, plays as a second winger. He's also an important player in this verticality, because, for example, there are injuries, there are disruptions in form, and these players allow the coach to make changes and manage the squad with more quality. Certainly, we have many midfielders. We have 5 players available, first and second midfielders, but the championship is long. I believe that everyone will have these opportunities, and of course, afterwards, they will play more based on their performance, right? We'll see in the future what the player's performance is. But certainly, I'm happy to have solutions, and I'm happy to have 2 or 3 players who are versatile, who can play more on the outside, more inside. Up front too, we don't use a striker, Esal, but Pelata is also a player who plays on the right, plays on the left, can play behind, and this type of player is important because he gives solutions to the coach and the team. Jardim, how are you? Good evening. Here in the middle, Gabriel Orfan, Paparazzo Rubegro channel. Jardim, in your squad you have 3 players who haven't been used yet, right? Diogo Alves, Andel, and Saul, who is injured today, was available on the bench. I would like to know your perspective on Saul within your team. He has already played wide with Felipe Luis, more on the right, but he stood out more playing as a second defensive midfielder, and he can get some minutes against Bahia next Sunday. Thank you. Of course, we have brought Sil and Solinia today after a break, Sil having the longest break, and Solinia having a shorter break. They weren't options to come on, because I believed that for example, knee is coming off. A few games where the team was more adapted to him coming on. At this moment, we still have to see Solinia's evolution, I believe with a few more training sessions. But he is an important player, of course, at Olimpo. And Solinia, as he was coming off a rib injury, I opted to bring on Alice at the end, who is also a physical player, who can play in duels, and can play on the outside and inside. Because if Solinia comes on for 10 minutes and gets knocked out, I'm hindering the player. There's no need for that. Therefore, those were the options. But certainly these are 2 players who will have continuity, and who, in the future, when they start training more, will be the option. Okay. Leonardo saying, Nay, good evening Julio Miguel Neto, live Rubro Negro fan. You talked a lot about versatility when asked about Lucas Paquetá, right? And today you also commented on your starters, right? Who actually took the field. And it caught my attention that the only 2 times Pedro wasn't a starter with you were precisely in the 2 Libertadores games, showing his great importance, especially in the Brazilian Championship games. When Pedro doesn't play, we see a slightly different Flamengo formation. Even because we don't have a player with his characteristics. I wanted to ask you about this versatility you mentioned in midfield in relation to Paquetá and the other players. How do you do it? Because you have to change theoretically you change the formation a little. When you don't have Pedro he's a more fixed player. Are you still trying to figure out or find within Flamengo's own squad a player who has a similar role or characteristics to Pedro to be a reference point? Or do you actually have to change the tactical formation when Pedro is on the bench? Good evening. It's not like that. Pedro's the striker of this team. I've already mentioned this a few times, but certainly there are some games where I want my striker to have other characteristics. Hey, I anticipated today that these teams would be a little more aggressive in their duels, and Bruno, a forward D, is very adept at navigating those movements and counter-movements. Pedro is a player who holds back more, and we saw that when the game slowed down, Pedro and the opponent had less capacity to physically attack us. Pedro appeared in the game providing forward support. It's also important to combine players sometimes, isn't it? And in the last game against Fluminense, we combined Leo and Pelata. When Pedro came inside, the two of them went into depth. These dynamics are important. For example, when we have Bruno up front, one of the wingers can already help more in the central zone. They don't need to go deep, because Bruno himself provides that depth. I always look for, as the French say, a connection between the players who play, which is, if one comes to the feet, another more for depth, one more for balance, another more for attack with space. Always take advantage of this connection between two players. Good evening. Good evening, Leo. Leo Jose from Coluna do Fla. Shui, I know that people want to know a lot about Paqueta. You also talked a lot about how you define the midfield in terms of the versatility of the players, but I wanted a slightly more detailed explanation about Paqueta and also about his position as a second defensive midfielder, right? He's a player who played against Cusco and against Medellin now. As a second defensive midfielder, he played very well, but soon Pugar and Jorginho will be back. When it comes to choosing your starting lineup, what specific criteria will you utilize to decide between Paqueta, Jorginho, Deo, or potentially a combination of Paqueta and Eric Pugar? Performance is always what matters in sports. I can't say that when Eric is available, he'll always play, or it's always Jorginho, or it's always Sael, or it's always Paqueta. Football is dynamic. I mentioned before the timing, Clace. Rascal's timing also varies. Clape, there are injuries. The important thing is that whoever plays has a good performance. Whoever performs better will play more. That's the law of life for all football teams. Therefore, I really hope to get Eric and Jorginho back. The last 3 matches clearly showed that we put a tremendous strain on Everton and Paqueta, a situation directly attributable to having 3 players unavailable. I am optimistic, however, that the return of the 2 injured players and Saul's improvement in fitness will allow us to manage the midfield more effectively. We can employ a 2-player, or, when needed, a 3-player midfield system. This was successfully implemented in the Cusco match, where we started with Paqueta, Everton, and Nick.
Good evening, Jardim. Bruno Castagna, Zona Rubro Negra channel. Waco, you're talking about defensive midfielders now. Waco, I wanted to comment on Tonaraujo. Could you comment a little on his evolution? He's been performing better in each game, with and without the ball. And if you could also talk about the defensive system. Guarda, despite conceding a goal today and on Sunday, it was due to individual errors. Collectively, it's been working very well. How do you correct these individual errors that can sometimes complicate the game? Thank you. With regard to Everton, you are better informed than I am. He is a player who played several matches last year. This year, he's also having continuity in some games. He is a promising young player, a product of our youth training system. It's also important for Flamengo to have players from our youth academy playing in the first team, and it's an example for the others who come after, isn't it? Well, I'm satisfied that he's improved. Of course, there are always things to improve, but he has shown commitment and quality. Regarding the second question about the defensive system, in terms of positioning, we have an idea, a behavior, But certainly goals also come from some errors, right? Both for us and for the opponent. And certainly there are areas where we can't lose the ball, as happened today. Perhaps another situation, but little by little, the players are also able to understand the guidelines, regardless of the changes. You saw in the last game they played with a back four, and today only Pereira played in that back four. It was a 75% change. But even so, everyone was committed and everyone was concerned, especially with those first balls from the opponent that we had assessed, which was a team that would always play the ball directly, whether in the corridor against the fullback or in the central zone. And we think that in the duels, that's why we also brought on Danilo, we ended up winning those duels. Both with Pereira and with Danilo, we managed to resolve those types of situations very well.
Good evening, Leo Jardim. Ivan Trinidade, Flower Hente channel. Kikian, you're arriving. It's already been over, right? 40 days in charge of Flamengo, Kikian, and consecutive games, right? Would you say today, Anne, if you could give a percentage, Anne, what percentage of this team already plays? What percentage of what do you expect it to play in the way you imagine football? In life, to reach high-level football, the demanding nature had to become a part of my core concepts, and I've always been the most demanding. I don't believe in perfection. I believe there's always room for us to improve, to become stronger both in life and in football. And that's why I think the team, and you guys know better than anyone how to verify this because you have an analysis of the past and the present. I just have an analysis of the present. I don't want to make comparisons, but some ideas that I'm putting forward. And the players are approaching them positively and trying to implement them in their daily training and then in games. But, as I said, this team is already formed. This team, I'm sure, wants to give it its personal touch. But this team has a history behind them. But, without a doubt, there are things they do now that they didn't do previously, and there are also things they didn't do previously and still don't do now. So, what follows has to do with the profile and the idea of each coach, okay? Thank you. That's it. Oh, there are 3 more. We're gonna have dinner at home now. I have that hamburger over there. Mr. Isaac Andrade from Flavos here. Since your arrival, you've spoken about continuity, as you just mentioned, with a personal touch, especially in the transition, and the team's behavior. Today, on a beautiful Libertadores night, what in this performance best represents the Flamengo you want to build? There's something we've been achieving, and I've been talking to the players about it, which is respect. Respect for our opponents. But in every game we play, we have respect for ourselves. Respect for ourselves means not thinking about what we don't control, which is the opponent, and thinking about what we do control, which is our performance and our attitude. And you saw in a classic match, we started very strong. We started well. But today, with a less valued team, in quotes, we returned to having the same behavior and the same attitude. And for me, it's very gratifying to see a team that has leadership, a team that plays its own football, regardless of who the opponent is. That's one of the things I like in my teams. Well, regardless of whether we're playing against Real Madrid or Madeline, what's important is controlling what we're capable of, which is our actions, our behavior, our attitude, and our footballing commitment. Jardim, good evening. This is Fabio Torres from the Decrun channel. 10 games in charge of Flamengo, many formations. You yourself said that the schedule imposes this, right? There are many games. The players need to always be in good physical condition, always fresh, and even so, we can see a great evolution in the Flamengo team. No, there isn't a repetitive team, right? Always the same lineup, But the understanding between the players is improving, right? It gets better with each game. Today, Flamengo had a great performance. Based on that, how do you consider this assimilation of your game, by the Flamengo squad? Are the players assimilating the idea well, and what do you think still needs to improve in Flamengo's game as a whole? Well, first of all, the idea and strategy that we defined for Flamengo and for the players have embraced it and have tried to apply it in the games, and through the training sessions we have done, we have developed a lot of what we intended, and in the games they have managed to apply it. Listen, I work with everyone, and I always say that anyone who gets to work with the whole cast must really measure up to the task. There can't be that excuse of, oh, I played less or I didn't play. No, if you work seriously and with commitment, when the day of the game comes, take advantage and play your game. Because the team has trained very well, has been focused. And that's what I intend. I intend that in every game we have fresh players, because with fresh players we will maintain a higher intensity. By maintaining a higher intensity, we can have a better game. And that's very much my idea as a coach. Right, so in these next 2 months we're looking at 2 games a week, sometimes even 3. We'll have games on weekends, and then midweek as well. It's simply impossible. No human being, not even a Flamengo player or any other player in any team, can play every single game. Well, but we also can't have players without playing for a month and then call them to account, honestly, because that's also killing the player, honestly. Being a month without playing and then being called to account. So there always has to be this management, it's not just management ace, but also the ability to play, some more to eat, some less, but everyone already fit to respond to what we want. And you know very well, even last year Ortiz played a lot in the final moments of the Libertadores. He was injured, and Danilo played and was an important player. Therefore, these values and this way of managing leave-in, which I also believe in, and which I think for a Flamengo team we can't depend on anyone. We have to depend on illness. Back here, Gilmar Machado, opinion piece. Professor A, this is your first Copa Libertadores, right? This competition, the Copa Libertadores de América, is, in my opinion, a great meeting of Latin American cultures, right? I honestly don't see another opportunity on the continent for such different cultural encounters, right? And the coach, in some way, needs to deal with the game, right? But also needs to deal with these differences in culture, environment, refereeing, team behavior, and fan behavior. You debuted at Altitude the other day, and now you're here in Rio de Janeiro. I wanted to know, at what point do you realize you're training tactically, interpreting this context of South American football? This is my second Libertadores game. Last year I played in the South American League, but I've had experience both in Asia and Europe, in the Asian Champions League, the European Champions League, the Europa League, and these competitions work the same way, don't they? Well, the Asian teams from the Gulf region, Qatar, the Emirates, are different from the Japanese and Koreans, and then we find them all together in these kinds of competitions. In cultural terms, in terms of the game itself, they are completely different. And here in South America, I find different referees. For example, today we had a referee who let the game continue. He didn't stop the game for any contact. I warned the players, told them to be careful, because this referee won't stop the game. It's not worth committing fouls, because he will call a 100% foul but not a 50% foul. We have to adapt to that. Or we have to adapt to the height. We have to adapt to games where sometimes the distance between the fans and the field is very small. In Argentina, I've played 1 or 2 games like that with the fans right on top of us. We also play games in large stadiums like the Maracana and others. Well, that's why I think so. I think it's a test that brings together big differences, and that in the game we have to pay attention to certain situations to minimize those differences. Today was more of a combat game, and I had some players who have a more combat-oriented style, and certainly there will be others who are less combat-oriented or more focused on gameplay, and then we also have to manage our players according to the situations that will arise. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.